Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm continuing my Goosebumps The Vanishing episode review series, and we're going to be looking at episode 3, The Haunted Car. Now, The Haunted Car getting an adaptation was something that I was completely taken aback by when it got announced a while ago. And I was like, you know what, let's see what The Haunted Car can do. You know, it was a monster featured in the Goosebumps 2015 movie. It got a classic Goosebumps reprint. It seems to be one of the more well-known Series 2000 books because of the reprint push and because of the movie exposure. And it seems to be a new fan favorite book in the Goosebumps franchise. So I was like, okay, if they can make the Goosebumps' version of Christine come to life on screen, I'd be there for it. And given that it's this show, and we have to have some interconnected monster stuff going along with it, and how it's going to have to be the device for giving a certain side character the spotlight for an episode, I knew that that was probably going to be the case. Given all of that, I want to say the first two episodes, Stay Out of the Basement Part 1 and Part 2 for me. I did enjoy this episode, but I did think that out of the first three episodes, this one was probably my least favorite. And I think it's because we have to get into some side characters and some more annoying things about this show, I guess as a whole, season 1 and this season combined, that I just don't like. And all that involving like padding and drama and stuff has become more noticeable beginning really here in the show for me. But nonetheless, like I said, I did enjoy it. Maybe not to the same extent that I would enjoy a Goosebumps book, because I will reiterate this. If you are expecting me to, just immediately jump on the bandwagon against this show because it just doesn't feel like Goosebumps, look, I get it. Goosebumps is an anthology series. It's what I love. It's why I'm a Goosebumps fan. It's why I collect kids' horror. I'm a kids' horror fan, but I'm mainly an anthology fan. And that's what Goosebumps really is. Yeah, you can make the argument that Goosebumps The Vanishing is an anthology season in this show, and the show is technically an anthology, but that's not what Goosebumps is. Let's all be real. It's more serialized. It's episodic. And a lot of people want just a traditional anthology show. I get that. But I'm not going to beat this show over the head just for that reason. I'm also not going to beat it over the head just because it's made by Sony and Disney. I get that a lot of people feel a certain way about them and what they've done to other franchises and how that might be unforgivable for you or whatever the case may be. If you feel that way, that's fine. But I'm just not going to partake in that because I like to look at things individually and not prejudge something just because it's made by somebody and let that cloud my judgment of the product. If that's how you think, that's totally fine. If you're mad at me about my opinion on that, leave it in the comment section. I'll drop you a like and a heart, and I'll go on about my day. So do what you will, but that's how I feel about it. So, yeah, The Haunted Car, I guess we might as well get into what the episode's about, and then I'll get into my review of it. So, this episode picks up kind of in a flashback where we get Alex's, character given the forefront in the beginning of the story here. We get caught up in a flashback where she is in this, I guess, rundown apartment building with these juvenile delinquent kids who are, using fireworks and taping them to their hands as like a prank or a dare thing in that edgy kind of way. And while she's trying to plead with these boys to stop it because it's getting too dangerous, one kid who's like the main asshole of this group gets his fireworks stuck to his hand and he can't get the tape off in time, so she has to fidget with it to help him, and they accidentally throw the firework into a curtain and catch the building on fire, which of course burns the building down. And all the kids skedaddle besides her because she's not necessarily a bad kid. She was just a good kid that made the wrong decision and got caught in the bad situation. Well, she ends up arrested and put in the back of a cop car, and she realizes that her mom, who's a police detective, who we know as Detective Ortiz, and we met her in the first episode of the season, and she's a recurring character, as we'll see. She is called down to her own daughter being arrested, and she's mortified, and she's kind of disgusted at her kid for being involved in something like this. Well, we get caught up to speed after her trial that she went to juvie for a little bit, and then she got put on house arrest with an ankle monitor, and she's allowed to leave home to go to school and walk around, but she has to be home by a certain time or the thing's going to go off, and if she dares to go against it even once, she's going right back to juvie. So knowing that, she's now doing community service also to help reprimand her sentence because, she needs to do communal time to not have to serve time in juvie, right? And she sees the guy that essentially got her in trouble to begin with when it was all his idea while she's doing community service. And we kind of saw her doing that in part 2's episode of Stay Out of the Basement, but that was just kind of a thing that we got to learn about her subtly in that, and it expands on it a little more here, but not too much. And the guy runs off on his bike, and she wants to chase him down. But now, since she is convinced that he's in the area and she knows where his whereabouts could be, she wants a ride or to borrow somebody's vehicle to go try to find this guy so she can talk with him. And it's not implied on why she wants to talk with him, but I'm assuming that she wants to talk with him to get him to come clean so she can get out of trouble because she didn't deserve what happened to her, right? So Alex decides to go ask around for a ride, and she finds CJ on his moped doing some deliveries and what have you, and she wants a ride from CJ or to be able to borrow his moped, but he makes a comment saying that she's like a convict and he doesn't trust her, and she's like, okay, whatever, you're a lost cause, CJ. So CJ bails out of the situation, and then we get caught up to speed with her in front of Trey's father's automobile shop, who had fixed the car, and now they have to move it in front of the garage out into the street. And we get introduced to a scenario where Dr. Brewer seems to think that Trey was the one that broke into his basement the night before, and he's pretty convinced that happened, and he's telling his kids as they're leaving to go hang out with whoever. I think Devin wants to go hang out with Frankie again and meet up at the coffee shop to discuss some things they witnessed the night before together involving a certain character. If you haven't seen my review of it, I'm implying Trey. So Dr. Brewer ends up at the shop of the father to give him a peace of mind, and Detective Ortiz is there because he's trying to report that Trey broke and entered in his house and damaged his stuff. And they're trying to build a police case, but nobody knows what happened to Trey. Trey's up and gone, and everything is really out of whack and weird. Well, we see that Devin and Frankie are at the coffee shop, and they're talking about what happened, and Devin kind of gives some subtle information about the sewer and possibly something being down in the basement that possibly caused this to happen, or might be linked to this certain phenomenon that happened to him at the military bunker. So him and Frankie, they kind of disappear from the plot for a while, but they come back later on in the episode. Mainly this episode involves Cece and Alex. Cece being the fraternal twin of Devin, and if you don't know those characters, they're essentially the main twins of the story, involving at least the teen side of things in the story. And Cece and Alex are implied to have this romantic connection with each other. They're kind of in like a flirtmance. And Alex, what causes them to have this interaction in the episode is that Alex sees Trey's car parked in the street and notices that the mechanic left the key up in the sun visor. So she's like, I need a ride to go find this guy. So screw it. I'm going to go take Trey's car and borrow it. I'll bring it right back. Nobody's going to know. So she takes the car and ends up parking in an area where she thinks she knows she's going to be able to run into this guy from the flashback that we got to see her with. And Cece, of course, meets up with Alex, and they're having a conversation inside of Trey's car, flirting around. And, Alex reveals that she wants, some revenge on a certain somebody. And, they're going over like preconceived notions about the situation and all that. And then, Cece ups and leaves. Once things get a little too weird with the car, let's just say. And, while the two are joyriding in Trey's car, talking, there's like System of a Down music playing. I think it's BYOB that's playing, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mixing up the song title, but I think that's what the song is. And there's, if you didn't watch the end of episode 2, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. But in this episode, it's kind of important to bring it up. In the ending of episode 2, there's this black tar-like substance that had went into Trey's car that might be affecting the gas pedal and causing the two girls to roar down the street at a very high accelerant rate of speed as they're trying to look for this guy on a bicycle. Well, this ends up scaring the guy, and he ends up disappearing out of the story for a little bit. And once Cece bids farewell, once they're finally able to stop the car and whatnot, after finding a potential lead on where he is and all that, Cece ups and leaves, and it's just, the girl in the car. And we see Alex realizing that the car perhaps has a mind of its own. And she was privy on that when she got to stop it, and maybe some signs earlier on before she started driving it kind of implied this. But what ends up happening is, I guess, the main gist of the story involving Alex for the rest of the episode is that she ends up going on a wild ride that takes her to the rundown military bunker in Gravesend, and she is now being tailed by this guy that she was following on a bike, who's now in a car. There's a high-speed chase involving that, and the guy wrecks his car to avoid when she reveals to him that she's not driving the car. And this freaks him out, right? Well, she ends up crashing through the military barricade and almost drives off a cliff with the car. But she gets out the car before the car, drives off the cliff. She's dumbfounded at what just happened, right? But we see that the goop inside the car is traveling underwater, perhaps into the military bunker. Well, going back to what I said about Devin and Frankie earlier, for the main mystery part of the story, going back to the Dr. Brewer side of things, Dr. Brewer has now found one of the pieces of the plant in the sewer that Devin saw in Stay at the Basement Part 2. And him and Frankie are down in the basement, but Dr. Brewer doesn't know that they're in there. And they're kind of eavesdropping on a conversation. And we do see some things earlier that happen with Dr. Brewer where he is telling his colleague about, this bulb that, it was mentioned in episode 2 as well, but the bulb disappeared with Trey. And the results came back in episode 2 that revealed that this bulb creature perhaps is carnivorous. And Dr. Brewer, I think, left to go try to find a crap ton of meat, right? And I didn't touch on that in the review, but he went to go try to find a bunch of meat to try to feed this thing. And that's why he was gone out of the basement when Trey broke in. Well, he goes to the police precinct to talk to Detective Ortiz, and while they're talking, he's trying to get some answers that they might know about his brother, but she's like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. Like, I can only help you so far, and he feels lost anyway, and he's like, well, you know what? I guess I'm in it on my own. I don't really have your help like I thought I did. So he leaves pissed off, and knowing that Trey is missing, his basement was broken into, and this research that he's doing was stolen as well. Really has nothing to go off on besides looking at maybe some residual evidence and trying to piece that together. Well, he ends up finding out that there's a substance inside of this plant stem that he found in the sewer that looks like the same black substance that was found on his brother's clothes. And it might have a sign that involves some magnetism or it's communicating with the other substance like it. So Dr. Brewer follows its lead, and it takes him by the end of the episode essentially to the same bunker that Devin ended up in and that his brother was in 94. And I won't go any further on that, but that's where we, I guess, leave off with Dr. Brewer for the time being. And for Frankie and Devin, they get to bond a little bit after their, experience with Trey. And Frankie, of course, is petrified to go down to the basement because they know something is wrong. But Devin knows that he's starting to piece together that what happened to him and maybe his memory loss and all this and why he can't remember certain things perhaps is linked to what he observes that his father is researching into. And I won't go any further than that, but that's also going to play a role, as we'll see later in the show. And essentially, that's all you really need to know about the haunted car. Maybe I can go into the wrap-up for what happens to Alex's character in the situation. So she ends up kind of stranded after the car wrecks, and she's left to walk home. And it's getting dark, and she's going to be short on time to get home before the ankle monitor goes off. And she has a moment where her mom finds her and takes her home and saves the day for her. So I guess that's nice. So Alex can stay in the story and not go back to juvie. Because that would be just too melodramatic. But other than that, that's all you really needed to know about the haunted car episode in a nutshell. There is many other things you can discover if you go watch the episode yourself. I'm just skimming the surface and trying to cover the main stuff that the episode goes down. So this episode, like I said, I don't think it's my favorite episode of the first three. And I guess I'll start off with my negatives here that I think is more pronounced in the first two episodes. My main problem with the first season in the 2023 show, or I guess Goosebumps, the TV show, its current iteration I'm speaking of here, is that the drama was often the focal point of majority of the episodes. And the monster stuff felt like an afterthought after a while, especially after the first 4 episodes. And this one, it felt like a weird melding of like the later episodes from season 1 and them trying to do solo characterization stuff in the mix. And I get the appeal of trying to solo characterize characters like Alex, who are just side characters, and you're trying to build on her backstory and empathy and perhaps what drives her and how, getting to the origin of how she ended up a delinquent and, going the whole route that she's innocent and she was basically taking the fall for a prick who doesn't own up to his shit. That's fine. But the episode spends way too much time on that, right? And when we're talking about, the mystery that's been lingering from the first episode, that feels like the afterthought here. They hardly touch on the plant phenomenon, the goop phenomenon. Even there's a whole plot reveal that I skipped over about what happens to Dr. Brewer when he ends up in the bunker, but it maybe involves a certain character that we thought was taken out of the story, and that's all I'll say, because it might play a role in episode 4 moving on, and I'll save the discussion for there to keep you hooked in case you haven't seen and you're for somehow watching this episode review. What are you doing with yourself? Seriously, watch the episode before you watch my reviews. But yeah, rant aside, the episode just doesn't focus on that stuff too much. It's mostly just trying to build the will they, won't they stuff with Alex and Cece. And if that's what you like in these shows, I guess that's fine. But I don't need this romance. It feels like the backstory with Alex, I guess it's necessary to understand her character. But in the grand scheme of it all, I don't think you really need to know this information to have this happen. And I feel like her stealing the car, I guess, was her motive to get back at this guy. So I guess we had to know that information. But still, I think you still could have done this whole episode with the haunted car concept and not involved any of that. And I really don't see much of this paying off later, minus the fact that Alex might get closure with this guy and perhaps convinces him to turn himself in and get herself off the hook. But waiting for that moment, that doesn't seem all that important in the grand scheme of the story. Not disrespecting Alex or the actress who plays her, she's just not that compelling of a character. Even though they're trying to make her compelling, they just don't do enough with her. She doesn't have much personality outside of the fact that she's innocent. So take that for what you will. Cece's about as bland as ever in this episode too. She might as well not even be in the show. Yeah, I really don't know what the show is planning on doing with her. I guess we'll find out soon enough, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But yeah, bland as ever. Because of this stuff, trying to solo characterize, which I will say, this is a novice attempt of the showrunners, especially for this show, to try to characterize a character. That's something that I wish the season 1 did more, but here, it eats up too much time for this runtime. And going back to the randomness of what's going on with the monster goop in the car, going from it turns organic life into violent creatures or what have you. Now we have it possessing a car like it's a transformer. It feels so random, like all this stuff, and it's not being expounded on at this point, by this episode, I should say, at this point of the story. And it's getting on my nerves. Because that stuff should be built on more. You should be building on the mystery and them trying to uncover evidence on that more, and not be spending so much time in the relationship drama stuff. Like Devin and Frankie somehow getting together at the coffee shop and going down to the basement, and they just somehow spy on their dad and know that the dad's involved in the story. Like, even that stuff felt like mild filler. You know what I mean? It's just, the padding is so noticeable here. It just it grates me a little bit. And how they adapted the haunted car. Every time the car is about to rev up, they play that System of a Down song. Well, that's not a bad song choice. They just keep playing the same song. And yeah, I mean, there's so many other song choices to play in terms of, like, fast-paced, chaotic music. I mean, you could pick any Pantera or Slayer song and that would fit beautifully. Anytime to pick a thrash metal song for Goosebumps, you should have picked that, but I digress. Music choices were mostly fine here, but, again, cringe music here. There is some cringe moments. I will say one funny cringe moment that made me cringe and laugh at the same time was a Dahmer joke reference from Dr. Brewer. I thought that was hilarious, and I was like, oh, come on, man. It was one of those type of situations, but I will say that stuff's still here too. In terms of what they did with the haunted car, going back to that, it being some sort of goop possessed transformer just giddying up at a high speed down the road is fine, but it's not really the haunted car. There's nothing really chilling about it other than it kind of seems to have a life of its own, and I guess the source of the scares comes from Alex feeling like she's trapped in the car and she's on a death race, essentially. Still, like, that's not the haunted car to me. The haunted car had a little more personality in the book, and I was kind of hoping that maybe this could have been the moment where the goop possibly animates itself and could communicate through maybe the radio or something. I don't know. Probably would have made it more confusing in the long run, but still, for what we got, I guess was fine, but I just wanted more out of that. And yeah, it's getting to the point at this point of the show, by episode 3, that we're kind of hitting that slump in the story progression. We have to get through side characters and, giving backstory on them because they're probably going to be main players later on. And this is, I guess, the ailment of long form storytelling, in my opinion, compared to a traditional anthology show, is that you'll have decently paced episodes at times, and then you'll have episodes that have a decent pace going for them, but they're just so chock full of useful and useless information that just sink the fun out of the enjoyment slightly, or sometimes heavily, as season one's case often than not was. Here, it wasn't as bad because the characters, I think, for the most part, have better actors than the first season. No offense to the actors from the first season. I just think these group of kids are a bit better, and possibly even the adults at times. So it helps that they have good performances and they have good chemistry with each other. So that kind of helps soften the blow. But yeah, here, I mean, it doesn't really scream something that I want to love. But I will say, getting to some positives here, the mood and atmosphere is good as usual with this show. I like the car design. I liked that it has that haunted car vibe going for it. I don't know the specific model. Forgive me if I'm ignorant on what car model it is. But I thought the car design was cool. And I do like the death race aspect to it. It was kind of thrilling. And there's some good scenes in here that kind of got to me a little bit. In terms of like one specific scene involving Dr. Brewer when he's in the bunker and there was that jump scare with a certain character. That actually got me. But in terms of horror, it felt a little bit dialed back because the monster goop is just possessing a car, and that's really all it is. It's supposed to be more thrilling than scary. And while I enjoyed it, it wasn't the greatest thing ever, but I had a fun enough time. And getting to know Alex a little bit better in the grand scheme of it all, I think was kind of cool. And I like the dynamic between her and her mom. I think that's kind of interesting. And I'm kind of curious to see where that ends up in this show. It probably won't mean that much in the grand scheme of things, but, something to latch on to. And, yeah, we got the plant goop mystery starting to kind of come together, and there's implications that it can communicate and have a hive where they all try to locate. So I think that's intriguing. I want to see what angle they're going to do there with it. But yeah, other than that, this pretty much felt like a bona fide filler episode. All in all, wasn't terrible. It wasn't annoying to watch all that much, other than the obvious padding, like I mentioned. But given all the problems I have with it, from a 0 to 5 star basis, because I rate this show on a YA scale, and I'm not using kitty gloves with a 1-point curve like I do with kids horror, I'm going to give this episode a low decent, maybe a high okay. I was leaning maybe a 3 out of 5 stars, but the more I'm thinking on it, I'll probably give this a 2.75 out of 5 stars, or maybe if you equate that to a 10 star scale, a 5.5 out of 10. I liked it when I first watched it, but when I think on it more, this is one that I'm just not that big of a fan on. It has its moments to it, but it's not really dull. It's not necessarily bad. It's just kind of in the middle. And that's how I feel about this episode. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the haunted car. Let me know down in the comment section if you saw this episode. What's your thoughts on it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.